My research that you'll hear about here in a moment basically concludes by saying that when people are reminded of money, they don't behave pro-socially. They prefer to be alone rather than with others, and they're very much more interested in an isolated, insulated orientation towards the world, and not so much one that's connected and pro-social and thinking about others. So with that, let me get started because I'm going to develop the theory as I show you some of our experiments. Okay, we did figure this out. All right. What would happen in these experiments is subjects come into my laboratory, and we're trying to find out how people represent the construct of money by differentially activating that construct in some subjects, and then in other subjects, we're not going to activate the construct of money. And then we're going to test to see people's behaviors subsequently and see whether they vary as a function of whether they'd earlier been reminded of money or not. And so these initial experiments were our perhaps clumsy attempts at trying to remind people of the construct of money in some very big ways. So in this first experiment, our subjects came into the laboratory where they were met with a Confederate, who's really someone who works for my lab. She's posing, in this experiment, this Confederate's posing as another subject. They meet, and we say that the purpose of this experiment is to see how different people's personality traits play out when they're interacting in a sort of game-like scenario. And since we're here in the business school, we're using economic-type games. So subjects in this experiment, okie dokie, multiple things going on here. Subjects in this experiment are coming in and they're going to play Monopoly. And in this set of subjects, some of the subjects play Monopoly with the Confederate, and then the Confederate leaves, and they're left with $4,000 of Monopoly money, which we, in a small lab meeting, decided seemed like a lot of Monopoly money. We're really sure how to think about it, but that seemed like a lot. And we told them that they were going to have this here, and it was for later. The important thing about this for later is that subjects very much knew, you can test this with post-testing, that they had not earned that money per se, they had not been endowed with that money, and they were not being rewarded for their performance in the game. Rather, we just told them that this money was for later. So subjects in the $200 money condition are also left with a little bit of money on the side of their table, but this was deemed, again with that same lab meeting, by being just a little bit of money. And then other subjects still, when the game is cleaned up, are left with no additional money. So for these last subjects, the construct of money should be starting to decay from their minds. So to review, all the subjects had been having a Monopoly game interaction with the Confederate. When that game is cleaned up, some subjects are left with a lot of money seated on their table on which they're working. Other subjects are left with a little bit of money. And still other subjects are not left with any money, so the idea of money for them should be starting to decay or lessen. So in this first experiment, we wanted to test whether people who were differentially reminded of money might behave differentially pro-socially, and we tested that in the domain of helping. So in this experiment, a second Confederate now comes into play. Subjects are seated in the room in which they played Monopoly, and the experimenter says, you know what, this lab is extremely busy. We have a lot of different things going on, and we're going to have to move you from this lab room over to a lab room that's across the way. So while they get up and they're moving, they cross into a middle open space, much like this, where they're intercepted by the second Confederate, who is acting as if she's playing a hurried experimenter. She has a variety of different office supplies in her hands, including a manila envelope with those little tiny golf pencils that we use to fill in Scantrons at universities. She drops that bag of pencils right in front of the subject, and we see how many pencils the subject helps her pick up. You see that the amount of helpfulness varies as a function of how strongly subjects had been reminded of money earlier. Subjects who had sat at a desk for which, for 5 minutes, $4,000 of Monopoly money was placed were the least helpful of all the groups in this experiment. Subjects who had not been reminded of money very strongly in our control condition are being the most helpful. And subjects in the low money condition are falling somewhere in between the two. So here we have initial evidence that being reminded of money then impacts people's pro-social behaviors in the form of helping. We decided to try this a number of different ways. In this next experiment, we orchestrated it so that the helping demands were clear. Because the problem with that initial experiment is it's not totally clear to the subject, perhaps, that help is needed. When a subject is walking across an experimental laboratory and some sort of accident happens with papers and pencils on the floor, it's not clear that it's the subject's job to be helping. So we wanted in this next experiment to very much make clear that help is needed. So here's what we did. We actually changed the manipulation of activating the construct of money to be one that's very clean. It's also a little bit boring. But we have our subjects in the money condition coming into the laboratory. And because we say that we're interested in different marketing slogans and ad copy, we'd like to know how people think about and arrange words into meaningful phrases. So we would have subjects take a look at a scrambled phrase like, is outside cold desk it? And they'd have to look at that and determine that 4 of those 5 letters make a meaningful phrase. You do this a few times, it becomes very facile. And in this neutral condition, you can see that the phrase would be, it's cold outside. So in this task, subjects are descrambling 30 neutral phrases, neutral meaning they're not money related at all. In our money condition, we have subjects descrambling 30 phrases, 15 of which are related to the construct of money. This one here is, anyone? High-paying salary. There we go, ding, ding, ding. High-paying salary. It's important to note that some of the phrases in this money prime are in fact talking about having money, like a high-paying salary, but still others are talking about money as it sort of flows out, things like he paid the bills. This is what happens. Again, a little bit of dramatization is going on, but we now have the experimenter come in and tell the subject, you know what, this lab room is extremely busy and we don't have another place to put someone else and she's going to have to sit in this room here with you. So we bring in, again, a Confederate, someone working for the lab, and she's now presented to the subject as another subject in a different experiment who just doesn't have a place to sit. So that Confederate sits down in the same room as our real subject, and the experimenter says, I'm going to leave you two for a little while. I've got to run down the hall. Things are really busy. I'll be back in a little bit. So she leaves, and now the two of them are working on their different questionnaires. After a few seconds, the Confederate says to the subject, I don't really understand what to do here. Can you help me? Very clear, very explicit, help is needed. And the idea is this, it's like a search a word task, but it's done with numbers. And so as the participant would help the Confederate would continue to feign confusion. I don't understand. Can you only go up and down? Oh, only left and right. Oh, no, not only, and so on and so forth. And so at the same time, we are surreptitiously timing how long the participant is being helpful to the Confederate. And here's what you see, that when subjects had earlier been reminded of money, they are giving less help to a confused peer than when subjects had not earlier been reminded of money. This is, on the y-axis, the second spent helping. And in fact, when you do a more gross analysis in which you see whether subjects even tried to help or not, you see an effect there as well. Some subjects simply did not try to help and said something like, I don't know, that's not my problem, or I think you should really figure it out. So you see it both in terms of gross willingness to help and then how long they were helpful. We move now to a new context and ask the question, well, maybe it's the case that our money-reminded participants were not being helpful because we asked for help in a very specific way. We asked for help in terms of time. Maybe people reminded of money would be helpful if they could be helpful in terms of money. So we set up the following scenario. In this experiment, the subjects come into the laboratory and we say, this is an experiment that is coming at the end of the semester, and we only have quarters to pay you with because the last experiment that we ran used quarters because of it had a pay-for-performance design, and that's all we have left. Sorry. Really, what this is for is so that our subjects have 8 quarters, 8 units of money in order for them to have the opportunity to donate later. So we wanted to give more of a nice continuous measure of being able to donate. So in this experiment, subjects come in and they sit down and they do the same verbal task that you had heard about before. Subjects filling out either the neutral descrambling task or the money descrambling task. After which they do several different filler questionnaires, and then the experimenter says, actually that's it. The experiment is all done. Thanks so much. I know it's very boring, but this lab is interested in personality perceptions and how they relate to other personality perceptions, and so it simply involved filling out questionnaires. This is what's called a false debriefing. It's a wonderful tool for experimenters, because then as the experimenter's leaving the room, she says, oh, and by the way, we are taking donations for a university student fund. There's a box there in the back if you'd like to donate. Subjects are now given a private opportunity to donate, and we know they have money to do so because we gave them 8 quarters earlier. So here's what you see. It's not the case that the subjects in the earlier experiments weren't helpful because of it involved time and not money. Here, subjects reminded of money are donating less of their money that they've just newly earned to a university student fund relative to subjects who had not been earlier reminded of money. So far, what kind of a theory do you think comes out of these data? What would you say would be the theory that these data go towards? I'm going to start cold calling. I work in a business school. Andy.
I knew you were going to cold call me the moment you mentioned it, because Jennifer always does that. I say that the theory is that the more the people are fixated on money, whether it's for time or for actual, having, the more they value it, or the more they implicitly attach themselves to it and want to part with it less.
Okay. Oh, interesting. Okay. So then when subjects are reminded of money, then and so they come to value their time more as well in the earlier experiments? Is that also?
That was what I was noting before, and then you did this one, and I thought that same thing might apply, but just more broadly.
Okay. Or more broadly. Okay, that's one. Any others, Greg?
I think it just puts them in a stingy frame of mind.
Stingy frame of mind. So when people are reminded of money, they turn into little Scrooges, huh?
They start counting and thinking what they've got, and it's about accumulating.
Yeah, having and stinginess.
Giving, you've got to give it away.
Yeah.
You've got to release.
Yeah, you got to give it away. You've got to release. Okay, good. Tara?
Yeah, I mean, I work for a company where this is actually a big deal. We're constantly asked for money, and there's a certain detachment. I know I meet with nonprofits all the time, and so when I talk to Jennifer a lot about this, but when people just come to money, we detach because we're constantly being barraged. I mean, I think society is constantly being barraged of what we have to pay out, and you want to feel valued for something.
Yeah,
else.
I like that. So money elicits a detached sense or attached sort of mindset. Oh, I like that. I hadn't heard the word detached before, but that really resonates with me. Yes, Meg.
Well, this is similar to Greg's comment, but I think the money thing creates an inward focus.
Yes.
And the inward focus is actually what negatively impacts both the time and the future release of the money.
Nice. Inner focus. Good. Hold on to that. And Jamie, last one? No. Okay, good. Okay, so survey says, I give this talk all over, doesn't this just show that money makes people feel selfish? They make them feel selfish. They make them behave selfishly. So survey says most people will say that when you look at these data, they say, well, what have you really shown us here? Money makes people selfish, stingy, inner focused, viewing things at which they have and own as more precious than maybe things that other people have and own. Yeah, so we think that that's not actually quite the answer. That's part of an answer. We think actually it looks a little bit more like this. We think that people reminded of money turn into what we call self-sufficient beings. And in self-sufficiency, people, it's true, are not willing or they're become reticent to help, but they're also not really willing to receive help from others either. So in my lab, we were developing the hypothesis that money elicits a self-sufficient orientation. And in this self-sufficiency mode, you would see it in one form as being less pro-social and less helpful. But in another form, you might also see that people are willing to work longer and harder at the things that they value, the things that are their own personal goals. And in that sense, they would be less interested in receiving help from others. So we did a series of experiments to follow up on whether this more self-sufficient mode had been activated. So here's one experiment. In this experiment, again, we did that verbal task you'd heard about before. It's nice, it's easy, it's clean. We know exactly what it's doing psychologically. Here's what we give subjects after this. Now, our subjects are left alone in a room with something called the 9-dot problem. Anyone ever done the 9-dot problem? Yeah. Did you get it? How long did it? It's a tough one, right? Yeah, it's often used in organizations to get people to think outside the box. Literally in this case. That's how the answer is solved. And in this experiment, our subjects are told that they have the opportunity to ask for help at any point. All they have to do is knock on a door, and the experimenter will come back in and give them helpful tips or, in fact, a solution. So we wanted to know now, a selfish person would not want to give help to other people, but when she got into a jam, she'd be the first one to raise her hand and say, hey, 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 I need help. Come help me out here. A self-sufficient person would perhaps not be interested in helping other people, but would also be reticent to accept help from others, instead preferring to work and try to solve challenging tasks on their own. And that's, in fact, what you see. Subjects who are reminded of money work longer and harder at their own goals than subjects who are not reminded of money. So these subjects here are refusing help in order to work on a very challenging task, one that you might even say is very frustrating. And then it became bigger than just about helping. So we did a series of other experiments. We were trying to map this out. So for example, in one of our other experiments, we had the opportunity to ask for help, be in the context of just a peer relationship. And so in that experiment, subjects are seated in a room, working again on a challenging problem. This one was actually unsolvable. And it works out great because you're not going to solve it, so the experiment can go on for a long time. We get good data that way. We also then have another peer come in and sit with the subject, and we tell them, this peer, this person had just done the experiment that you've just done, and now he's here to do a second experiment. So now the participant knows that this peer knows what's going on, and the experimenter says, I have to run down the hall, I'm going to be away. If you have any questions, you can probably ask him. And so now you see in that same experiment that subjects reminded of money also work longer and harder when trying to achieve that then impossible goal, even when they could ask a friendly peer. So then we decided to say that we had a nice story about money and helping, but we thought this idea of self-sufficiency was bigger than that. So in this experiment, our subjects come into the laboratory, and they're seated at a desk. So they're doing this individually. They're seated at a desk on which there's a big, thick packet of questionnaires that we want them to fill out. And off in the corner of that desk is a computer that's showing a plain PC backdrop at first. But then we use a screensaver that comes on at a certain point when they're filling out those questionnaires to differentially activate the construct of money. So this is one screensaver that comes on. This is from a company called Geliosoft, and if you go to their website, it always says, our most popular screensaver ever. I don't know who has this on their computer, but happily and luckily for me, this screensaver comes in different denominations and 5 different currencies. So when I collect data in Europe and when I collect data in China, you can use the same screensaver. So as my subjects' heads are bent down, working furiously on their questionnaires, often their visual periphery is showing a screensaver. This would have money. Luckily for me, too, the same company makes a fish screensaver. So you see a very similar pattern, this time just with fish. And for the purposes of this experiment, we wanted to ensure that there wasn't something special about the fish screensaver, so we have a no screensaver control as well. What happens now is the experimenter says, in this experiment, your next task is to have a get-to-know-you conversation with someone who's down the hall. I'm going to go get that person. Why don't you grab that chair, pull it up, and get ready for the conversation. And we measure the distance between the 2 chairs as preferred social intimacy. And this is what you see. subjects who'd been reminded of money from that screensaver put more physical distance between themselves and another person, showing that they prefer more social distance and certainly less intimacy. So,
It's like a foot. Is that what that comes out to be?
yes, it is. Yes, it is.
So it's not like a fraction of an inch.
Right, it's not like a fraction of an inch. And you see, I mean, you sort of see, okay, these data were collected in Canada. You get sort of a physical distance, you know, preferred distance. But you can see that the fish screensaver doesn't bring people together, which was secretly our fear. Fish would make people want to come together. So people are putting the same distance, right, in the fish and the fish and the blank screensaver, and then just more physical distance when they've been reminded of money. So in this experiment, this other experiment, we asked people whether they would, in the context of a work assignment, prefer to work alone or together, and we made this one a little bit tricky. So in this experiment, subjects are now either reminded of money, fish, or blank screensaver again. And the context here is that they have the opportunity to work with someone else on an upcoming advertising development task. And we say, through random assignment, they have been chosen to be the one who gets to decide. Work with the person down the hall or work alone. But we make it clear to them that working alone means you do the whole task yourself. And clearly working alongside someone else then divides that labor up somewhat. So the question is, will people prefer to work alone even if it means that they have to work harder? And the answer is definitely yes. So in our university undergraduates, it turns out that chance to work with someone else on a boring task is jumped at. Our undergraduates think that's a fantastic idea. But this completely flips when our subjects had been earlier reminded of money. Now you see that even though they have to do more work than they would otherwise, yeah, no, they prefer to be alone. Okay, and in this experiment, we then decided to say, hey, wait a minute. We had this lab meeting, and we came to the conclusion that probably what we'd been doing was wrong-headed, because maybe when people are reminded of money, they do want to be separate from others, but all of the others in our previous experiments were strangers. There was a clumsy peer dropping things in front of you, or confused students. There was someone that you have to have a get-to-know-you conversation with. But maybe when people are reminded of money, they really want to be close and intimate with friends and family. And we had not tested that. So we brought it into the domain of leisure activities, and we asked these questions. First, our subjects come into the lab, and they sit down at a desk, and now they're doing those irrelevant questionnaires, this time with a poster hanging above their heads. I worked at the University of British Columbia, and we have beautiful, colorful Canadian money in this poster. Or two other beautiful, colorful posters as well. Sit underneath. And we ask these questions. If you had to choose one of the options in these pairs, what would you choose? So we gave our subjects a nice long list of different kinds of options that, unbeknownst to them, they didn't detect this. One option was for the self alone, and the other option was to do with others. So we were asking them at each moment, with each option, do you want to be playing alone, or do you want to spend your playtime with other people? And what we see is that even when they're thinking about friends and family, subjects reminded of money choose experiences for the self, as opposed to experiences to be done with others. So people reminded of money are self-sufficient in the sense that they're willing to work longer and harder to perform tasks, as long as they can be alone. And they're not helpful towards others as a consequence. There's sort of a two-pronged effect here. Data here collected at the GSB at Stanford by some colleagues who are in the organizational behavior group showed that when people are reminded of money, this is Stanford GSB MBA students, they are reporting less willingness to volunteer. So willingness to volunteer on items like I'd volunteer for an organization without financial compensation for myself, that goes down. I'm unlikely to undertake work without being paid. Agreement to that item would go up when people were reminded of money. So you see support from other labs showing that people reminded of money are less interested in volunteerism. You see that similar effects are obtained in India. This was a replication done by an Indian PhD student in psychology. Subjects in India reminded of money then said that they were less willing to lend someone money for a movie, give directions to a store, give someone a ride to an event that was sort of a casual event, or give someone a ride to something that was an important event. They were less willing to donate blood to surgery and provide comfort during surgery. These data stand out in particular for me because one of the questions when you see these data of mine are, well, this is like a North American effect, right? You've got all these subjects. You said you worked in Canada. You clearly work in the US. This is just how North Americans think about money. But in fact, in highly collectivistic societies such as India, being reminded of money moves people towards a less pro-social way of behaving and responding to others. It replicates in adolescence as well. This young woman here, his name is Shreya. Shreya's parents are bioengineers and physicists, and they take the magazine Science, in which our data originally appeared. She read the article and decided to try to replicate it among her 8th grade colleagues. So Shreya here reminded 8th graders of money or not, and then she asked them, out of $100, how much would you give to charity? And how much time would you be willing to help a classmate with some homework? By the way, this is Shreya here at, clearly it's her poster at the science fair. She not only won for the state of Indiana, she went all the way to the Discovery Channel Science Nationals on this project because it does replicate. So adolescents who are reminded of money say that they would donate less money out of a $100 windfall, and they say that they would donate less of their time to help a classmate who needed help with homework. I'm now going to bring you into a new line of research in which we're trying to extend the self-sufficiency idea. And in this line of research, we started asking how far we could push the envelope with this self-sufficient notion. So people who are self-sufficient feel like they can do things on their own. They don't want help from other people. And how could you really, 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 really test that? So we did it in the context of pain. In these experiments, subjects are either going to be given a painful experience or reminded of pain. And I'll tell you that we did these experiments all in China. So that was another big move for us, trying to ensure that the data that we're collecting in North America aren't somehow overly specific to North American cultures. So in this first experiment, subjects come into the lab individually, and they either count out yuan in the form of $100 yuan bills. And a $100 bill is like a $14 bill in the United States. So it's like counting out 10s or 20s. Subjects in the paper condition similarly count out 80-somethings, but those are 80 slips of paper. And in this experiment, we're now going to give subjects one of two other conditions. There is a famous task that we use in social psychology called cyberball. And it's an online interaction task that can be rigged to either represent a normal interaction with other people online or represent an interaction with people online that feels very socially isolating or excluding or ostracizing. And so in this experiment, we've now randomly assigned subjects to play the online game either in a setting in which they are playing normally and feel nice and included, or in a setting in which the other players exclude and ostracize them. So this is what cyberball looks like. You're just simply passing a ball. It's a very easy game, and you could see that you are the small hand down here. And when you pass the ball to one of the players, he receives it, throws it to another one, throws it back to you, and so on. In our ostracism version of the game, subjects are passed the ball twice in the first 7 tosses, and then none subsequently. No other passes subsequently. And in the normal play condition, it looks exactly as you saw here, passing the ball nice and equally between and among all the players. We then asked subjects immediately thereafter, how did that feel to you? And we used a measure of social distress. We said, how much did you feel valued or how much did you feel socially rejected? And you see that here, counting paper is like our control condition. So when subjects had been socially ostracized, they said it hurt, relative to when they had not been socially ostracized. But when subjects had earlier been counting money, that effect went away. Subjects who had been socially ostracized said that it felt about the same as subjects who had not been socially ostracized, suggesting that people who are reminded of money aren't bothered by the pain of social rejection. We ran a parallel study in the physical realm in which we reminded subjects of money or not, and then we placed their hands in very, very hot water, water that was bordering on painfully hot. And you see the effect there as well. Subjects reminded of money say that that hot water was not so hot, wasn't very painful. We now decided to flip this and ask whether people who are socially rejected or accepted have different feelings about money. So in this experiment, subjects come to the laboratory with 4 other subjects, and they all have a get-to-know-you conversation. Then they separate and go into small little different rooms, and each of them writes down who among those 4 people that they'd met would they most like to have their next task be with. We don't care what they say on those forms because at this point the subjects are randomly assigned to either be socially accepted or socially rejected. In the accepted case, the experimenter comes into the room and says, okay, this is very strange and this just never happens, but everyone chose you for the next task, so logistically it's just not going to work. We will move on to something else. In the rejection condition, the words are the same with the exception of one. No one chose you. It's just very strange. This never happens. Logistically, yeah, this isn't going to work. We'll have to move on. And so now everyone is moving on to a new task, either because they were so likable or because they were not so likable. And in that next task, we wanted to ask about their desire for money. So we used 3 different indicators. The first one here, drawing a $1 coin. This is a famous task that's been used for nearly 60 years because it seems that people who desire money more perceptually represent the idea of money as bigger. So they draw coins as bigger, dollar bills as bigger. It seems to represent their desire for money. We wanted to support or bolster that with 2 other indicators of desire for money. Here we asked our Chinese subjects, which of these 7 nice things in life would you trade to be a millionaire? Meaning give up for life, that was clear. And then we'd really given our subjects 8 yuan for participating, and we asked them how much and gave them an opportunity to donate that money. This is all on one graph, but all the differences are significant. You see that subjects who had been socially rejected represent coins as perceptually larger. They're willing to trade more beautiful things in life to be a millionaire, and they actually give less money to a local orphanage. So when people are feeling socially excluded, they want money more. They're wanting to grab it and desire it more. And in the very last study in this section I'm going to tell you about is trying to understand the underlying dynamics of this money construct. So here we very specifically did something we haven't done before. We focused people on money that they've lost or spent. We have generally been thinking about the money construct in this big generic way. We just remind people of money with Monopoly money or with words or with a screensaver. But in this set of experiments, and I'll show you this one here, we focus people on not having that money. Does it then do the same kinds of effects or something different? So here are subjects in the neutral condition come into our lab and they're given a calendar of the last month. And they write down what that weather has been for the last month. So thinking about the past. And our subjects in our money condition are similarly thinking about the past, that same month in fact, but now they're writing down their monetary expenditures or monetary losses for the month. And then we do the same thing we've done in an experiment I showed you 2 back. We have them go online and play a game in which they're passed the ball normally and feel nice and socially accepted, or in which they're not passed the ball very frequently and they feel socially rejected. And then we ask them how much pain they felt about that. Oh, you know that. You see that now the effect is reversed. Subjects who are thinking about the money that they don't have feel social pain more. much, much more, in fact, than subjects who are just in our control condition, in which, yeah, it's true, being socially excluded hurts, but it hurts a lot more if you're thinking about how you don't have money. So, one thing that we've drawn upon this in this latest line of research is that we're picking up this idea that people feel strong when they're reminded of money. So in those earlier experiments in which we had subjects come in and count out like 10s and 20s, they reported to us on a long, lengthy list of how you're feeling, different emotional states, different ideas about self-control, different ideas about self-esteem. The only thing that pops is this idea of strong. Subjects who had been counting money said that they felt strong relative to subjects who had not been counting money. And then when we focused those people, different people of course, but focused people on the money they don't have, then they said they didn't feel strong. They felt quite weak. So we're kind of coming to this idea that being self-sufficient because you're reminded of money means that you feel strong and robust as an individual. All right, so now how do we shift this effect? I'm now going to take a page out of Liu and Acker, and I'm going to suggest that one way we might try to remedy this is to get people focused not on money, but instead on time. So in this experiment, and there is a series of experiments here, subjects come into the laboratory, and they're going to be thinking about donating their time or their money to an organization called Hope Lab. And we're going to be hearing from Steve Cole here later in the workshop today about the work they do at Hope Lab. And we're going to be asking, or the researchers asked the participants either to think about donating their time first and then money, or donating money first and then time. And then they followed up with a real donation campaign, both in terms of money and time. So this is the Hope Lab. I didn't know, is this your old? Oh. That's their old logo. We look forward to this afternoon to see the new logo. Our participants, I keep owning this study, which is not, it's not my study. The participants in this experiment were UC Berkeley college students. And they see something like this. I don't know if you can see this. They're talking in this particular campaign about a video game that adolescents who have cancer can play, and it teaches them about their disease and how it progresses and how you can fight it. And you can fight it with these shooters, and the shooters represent, of course, the different medical remedies that they could be taking. So what the idea is that kids get behind this video game and they become more involved, invested, and aware of their disease. And so now the question is to our college, again, not mine, the college students in this experiment, how much do you think this organization is doing a good thing? How much would you like to volunteer to help them? And some of the subjects are asked, how interested are you in volunteering for Hope Lab? So that's a time question first. And then asked, how interested are you in making a donation to Hope Lab? Or those were flipped. And so then you'd have the money ask condition first. Then there's a 20-minute gap. See, they're doing other questionnaires. And then you see a variety of measures here. Jennifer, you're going to have to help me out with this.
Yeah, so there was just a box similar to your coin box. People were paid with $10 bills. And we surreptitiously measured whether people actually donated to Hope Lab. And in order to get a time behavior measure, we also asked whether they were interested in volunteering to Hope Lab, and then they would contact Robin if they were.
Okay, and did you give them the $1 bills for participating? The
Yeah.
$10 bills?
Yeah, this is
Okay,
like the
good.
quarter thing.
Yeah. At the University of Minnesota, we give $2.
Yeah.
You guys okay. I'd rather be a subject out here. Here's what you see. Subjects are giving more money when they're asked to think about giving their time first. So when they're thinking about Hope Lab and they're thinking about being committed to that organization, and they first think about it in terms of donating their time, it actually elicits more money from them than if they're first asked to think about giving their money. So again, this idea that activating the construct of money and having that be top of mind is hindering pro-social behaviors. And you see, in fact, that the money condition is significantly lower than a control condition. in which subjects are simply donating money without having been reminded earlier of time first or money first. Moreover, subjects gave their emails to then follow up and behaviorally donate their time. And you see that that too has a nice effect in the sense that asking subjects first to think about donating their time elicits more of their time being willing to be donated. So in both cases, reminding people of time seems to elicit more money and more time in terms of volunteerism, but reminding people of money seems to hinder that. And then further, they tracked it 1 month later, and you see huge whopping effect here. When subjects were earlier asked to think about donating their time, they follow through at a rate of 7%. But when subjects had been first asked to think about donating money or no questions were asked initially, you see that that number is much lower. Okay, so the talk that I've given to you today focuses on one theme. When people are reminded of money, they move into a self-sufficient mode. And what that means is that it means it's bad for pro-social behaviors. It means that they're not helpful in terms of money or time. It means that they're willing to work harder if it means that they're able to be alone. But that last point makes a significant, meaningful contribution. It's not simply that people reminded of money are stingy or lazy. They are self-sufficient. They're working longer and harder towards their own goals, but unfortunately not towards other people's goals. And people reminded of money are able to withstand pain and don't feel the pain of social rejection. The work from Lou and Acker suggests, though, that focusing people on time may in fact be one of the remedies that could be taken to move people into a more pro-social mode. Thanks. Kevin.
We've just started a project in southwest Kenya where we're working with groups of subsistence farmers to help them switch to cash crops. And we're also working with successful groups to use those as a platform for collective action on community priorities. Mm-hmm. Are we working at cross purposes here?
Well, that's what these data would suggest. I mean, not knowing as much about the cash crop idea as probably I should, but yeah, that's what these data would suggest. You want to make it, do something that's more of a euphemism for money rather than having money per se be the construct that's top of mind, because that doesn't help community action.
Well, it's interesting because it's not, the groups are really about talking through farming for the most part, introducing new farming techniques.
Right.
But they're also a vehicle for
Yeah.
credit. So they're not really money focused, they're farming focused.
Okay.
But these people are going from subsistence
To a cash crop.
to cash crop.
Yeah, the other, I'd have to talk with you more about it, but the one thing that's kind of relevant here is that if they're focused on those crops as being their own goal, then it might be fine. I'm not sure how the farmers are framing what that action necessarily means about themselves vis-a-vis the community, but I'll have to think about it, or we can talk more about the details. Yes, Bobby.
On our employee giving website, we just introduced a graphic that shows how much money people have given and how much time. And one of your studies says that when people see how much money they've spent, it makes them feel weak.
Yes.
What advice would you give us? Is that a good or not so good thing to have?
Well, my sense is that would not be a great thing to have, but I'd have to think about, again, the way it was framed. I'm thinking about Noah's work. The wonderful thing about that particular graphic is there's multiple things going on there. You've got this idea of spending your own money, which from my data would suggest that that's not that empowering. But then if the social norm is that everyone is doing it, that could offset it in a really nice way. So that is an interesting point of contact from both of our lines of research. So I'd want to see the way that that's framed for the viewers, for the people who are visiting that website.
Highlight the time, make the time piece more.
Yes, there we go. Yeah, just highlight the time part. That's right. That would be one way.
Smaller font.
Let me see. I haven't been over here. Dan?
That's right.
Yeah.
Just to make sure I understand correctly, so were all these studies, from what I've heard, performed on students?
No, not all of them. No, not all of them.
For the ones that were, how do you account for the fact that there seems to be a very basic intervening variable here, which is that students have an abundance of time and a scarcity of money. In other words, the conclusions to me seem to make sense in a student environment, but I'm not so sure about the world at large.
Yes, good. I'm glad you brought that up. So several of these experiments were run with a community sample, and then in all of our experiments, we try, to the best of our abilities, to get at lots of different constructs that would relate to what you're getting at. This idea of time is not so precious, but money really is. So for example, across all of our samples, we asked people about the socioeconomic status of their family of origin. What kind of money did they grow up with? We also asked them about, when there are university students, MBAs or undergraduates, we asked them about their earning potential, getting at their future earnings. Some of our participants are actually working and making some money or have some savings, and we factor that in as well. And we don't find differences in people's behaviors as a function of previous economic history or financial history or expected history, nor their current earnings. So we haven't found a lot of data to support this idea that there might be different ways of responding depending on how much you have money in your life. But I'll admit too that we're working with a range of, my college students who don't have a lot of money, up into the community sample in which you see people making, maybe $100,000 or more, but we don't have the high wealthy folks or neither the quite poor folks. Yeah. Yeah.
Bring life on, just
good.
in the interest of time. But thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks everyone.